started writing a book during COVID, which in a spur of the moment I called A Redesign for Life. I bet you can't guess what album I've been listening to. Uh, the reason for starting it, apart from being able to satisfy, some boredom and probably a bit of ego, was to try and sort of get over my, belief that the most important asset that we all possess is ourself, especially as we're more of us are living, these sort of multi-stage lives and in a world that's so fucking complex and volatile that, all those sort of old rules are, redundant. And much of society is so conditioned to towards materiality, to think that the most important assets that we should aspire to are material, have a monetary value, kind of cash, house, things like that. But I think that kind of that sort of thinking overlooks that, our intangibles, things like curiosity, imagination, adaptability, resilience, and one of my favorites, emotional intelligence, are some of the most needed things that we can have. I realize that this would probably have some of the more medieval politicians rolling their eyes, but fuck them. Not that they'd be listening to something as classy as this podcast anyway. But anyway, back to emotional intelligence. I've often banged on about, that really should. I think that really should be an integral part of our learning from when we're sort of first born. Empathy, social skills, self-regulation, also self-awareness, so important for, existing and thriving where we've got such emotionally unintelligent leaders that seek to divide and conquer, with this kind of delinquent lack of empathy and self-awareness. So here's the typically amateurish segue into my guest today. If you haven't read her autobiography called Fingers Crossed, How Music Saved Me from Success, then you really should, because that self-awareness and empathy that I just mentioned is really kind of like all over this book. It's a roller coaster of a read and reinforces certainly my belief of the importance of these kind of weird intangibles. And it's one of only like a few recent books that's really sort of captivated me and left me with a lot to think about. And of course, in music, in each stage of a musical life, she's really written songs that can 1 minute haunt me, the next uplift me. I honestly, smoke blowing time, by the way. I just find his songwriting breathtaking. I really do. Anyway, as is tradition, I've embarrassed myself for way too long, so I'll just introduce Miki Berenyi. Miki, good to
Hello.
see you. How are
Gosh,
you?
what a lovely introduction. There's no way I'm going to live up to that. So anyway.
Oh no, not at all. Honestly, like I have one thing to do in preparation for this, and if I can't get the fucking introduction right, then I'm screwed. So what's been going on then? What's
What's been
what's
going
been
on?
happening?
I don't know. I'm sort of thundering towards my 59th birthday, which is next week.
Hmm.
And it's a weird thing. I always kind of, yeah, I know as you get older, kind of forget like birthdays really don't matter that much. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
But I think I've always had that a bit that I almost preempt. I always remember like being 29 and already thinking that I was 30, like almost getting
Yeah.
confused by it.
Yeah.
So my bid to sort of accept becoming 60 quite
Mm.
soon is to grow my hair out, which is looking
Right.
that strange sort of unattended look at the moment. But at some point, I'm hoping that I can sort of immerse myself in the next stage of life by being led by my hair.
Well, I think I kind of stopped dreaming about that when I was about 23. Yes. But no, I know what you mean. I mean, but when we met the other week at in Nottingham, I remember that I said to you I was 58, and I'm not. I'm 57. I'm 58 in April, and I'm like, fucking hell. How did I forget that? But you're right. It's like you're almost preempting it. I hadn't thought of that. Kind of preempt
Yes.
this kind of what's coming. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's a sign of like a personality as well. That kind of, right, prepare for the worst. Like I don't want to
Yeah.
catastrophize about things, but I kind of need to know what's coming, right? Just so
Yeah.
I can test the boundaries and think, no, that's fine. Okay, I've sort of that's all right. I can deal with the next stage. It's fine.
Yeah. I guess we should talk about new music because you've got a new track coming out, I
We
think.
have got a new track coming out. We've got a song called Island of One that
Mm,
we've um, done. We're sort of at a weird mid-stage with the band because we did the album last year,
yeah.
Tripler, and now we're kind of working towards the next album. But as is the way with the modern world, because if you even want to play a gig or whatever, there's a general consensus that, oh, well, it would be a lot easier if you had a track to go with it. So this is why bands end
Yeah.
up just releasing inverted commas content, right?
Yes.
Just to
Yes.
keep the sort of pot on the boil.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, it often means kind of scrabbling something together quite quickly and not really knowing whether, well, it could end up on the next album. I don't really
Mm,
know because we haven't written the next album yet completely. So, but I
mm,
kind of don't mind it. There is a sort of, okay, so this is the way it is. You don't sort of ferret yourself away for sort of 6 months, write an album, record it, have
mm.
some massive game plan of release dates and tours. We now live in a world where you just sort of dribble things out when you can
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
try and keep, it's almost like you're waving at people going, "I'm still here."
Still here. Yeah. That kind of real problem of trying to keep your visibility up. You know, so much. I mean, we all know there's so much out there.
I mean,
To kind of sift
to be
through.
honest, I don't mind it massively because I do
Mm,
think, I'm at an age now where there's no kind of illusions that we're gonna, release some record and conquer the world. Do you know what I mean?
mm,
So you
mm.
think, okay, well, we'll just release stuff and it as long as it's
Yeah.
all out there and someone's paying attention, then it's kind of I don't really mind it that much actually. But like
Yeah.
I say, I'm not a young person who's starting out on a career and hoping to kind of, actually make a living out of something like
Mm.
that. I think then that's a very different thing. I
I,
feel what I'm doing is a bit care in the community, like we're just sort of,
yeah.
kind
No.
of putting stuff out. It's like, oh, that's nice. We can still do this. We can still play gigs. We can still put out songs. So fair enough.
Does it feel like you're, kind of really doing it for yourself now? And obviously, you kind of, what Ollie and Moose. I mean, does it feel like it's your own stuff and you just like really kind of in control of what you're doing now?
I mean, yeah, because the world has, in a way, the world has expanded outwards, but at the same time, on a personal level, it's really shrunk.
Mm,
There isn't this sort of vast support structure of
yeah, true.
a major label that is funding a indie label, and then the various deals that we would have made in Lush that mean that you can release records all over the world at the same time, and there's a whole
Mm,
infrastructure and agencies and college gigs and blah blah blah, this entire network that you
yeah,
plug into when you're a band. Well,
yeah,
now it's kind of you and a laptop, and we record our stuff at Ollie's studio and then send it off to Paul to me. I mean, it's like a little
yeah,
cottage industry.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it kind of reminds me of how I think someone told me this. Do you remember a band called the Enid?
yeah. Yes,
Sort of way back
yes.
in like the
Oh my
sort of
God, yeah.
70s.
70s, wasn't it?
And I think I remember someone sort of kind of eulogizing about the Enid and say like they're such a weird band. They just kind of they do it all themselves. They'll just record like a single and they just put it out. And there was something quite appealing about that. You could only get it through mail order, right?
Yeah, brilliant.
Do you know what I mean? But they were still like loads of people had heard of them. They were kind
Yeah,
of big, but
yeah,
there's a sort of that aspect to it that I think, okay, well, I guess there's a sort of full circle element that
yeah,
you've just got these bands now who just produce stuff and you can buy their merch at a gig, but
yeah,
probably not in a major record outlet.
yeah,
And so, I feel like, yeah, okay, that's fine. It's a new phase. Things go
yeah.
round and round, and that's where
Well,
we're at.
it's interesting. I remember like I was talking to a producer guy, Richie Kennedy, who works with I'm not sure if he still does. He certainly was. He was at Alan Mulder's studio,
All right.
Salt and Battery, and he was saying that. So this was maybe back in 21 or 22 when I was talking to him, and he said that he'd noticed then a much. I mean, Rich is only. I mean, he's probably in mid 30s, late 30s, maybe I would say. But he'd noticed like a big shift in artists coming in and wanting to know the more of the kind of the nuts and bolts of the whole kind of production and engineering and that kind of stuff. Probably because they have to now, but really sort of back then you didn't get involved in that, or not as much at least
Yes.
anyway.
Yeah, 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 for sure, for sure. I mean, I suppose there were always people who were interested in that. I
Yeah,
was a
yeah,
bit overwhelmed going into a
yeah.
studio, and like I thought, oh my God, there were just these like thousands of wires and things. But yeah, I can see how now it becomes like an opportunity to get, some sort of training because at some point you're going to have to manage,
Mm,
you know, the aim is to manage as much of it yourself as you can because there just
yeah,
isn't the
yeah.
money there to pay someone.
Well, I went on talking about being overwhelmed. I went on Saturday. I went to that club night that I mentioned that Segs runs in Old Street. So they had a DJ. DJ kind of started. He was playing I guess a sort of, oh, how do you describe it? See, this is where genres are useless, isn't it? Because it was a real kind of mix of stuff. It was like a sort of dark, trancy kind of stuff. But he had this equipment, like with all these wires and cables. And I was talking to her. I just said, "How the fuck do you do that?" Like, and he's just like he said, I just taught myself. I literally just kind of like did a bit of research on the sort of equipment and sounds that I was looking for, and then worked out how to do it. I guess that's kind of it. But to me, it was just baffling.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something quite liberating about the DIY side. The information is out there. It's amazing
Mm,
that you can, I mean, I'm a bit hopeless, but the fact that if there's a problem with my setup, you can Google it, and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
yeah,
patience. It takes a
yeah.
lot of patience, but back in the day, you'd be like, okay, I literally don't know what I'm doing. So
Mm,
but there is what I quite like is the sort of shared information of people, and
yeah.
there are suggestions, and people love to air their expertise. You can
They
go on
do,
any
don't they?
kind of, well, yeah, and
Yeah,
that's a great
yeah,
thing. People do
yeah,
like sharing knowledge, and it's kind of just takes time and effort, you know what I mean? But
yeah,
then you can
yeah.
actually develop a skill for something, which is what it's all about, really.
It's funny when you look on social media sometimes, and somebody asks a question, or somebody puts a post and or asks a question. You know exactly the sort of posts that are going to get like masses of responses. And you're right, it's when people kind of can share stuff, share their
Yeah.
knowledge.
I mean, it's filtering out the shit from
The
the
shit.
usefulness.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the problem. Because do you know what? I always remember like way back, I was not really a very online person in terms of
mm,
socials, but Moose was always looking at like, I think it would be like the Guardian sort of football pages. He
yeah,
was quite addicted to it.
yeah,
And I remember, and then he'd sort of go, oh, have a read of this, and there's all these responses. And I remember sort of thinking, like, if you wait long enough, you will just get every possible response.
yeah,
However combative, nasty, stupid, funny, irrelevant,
yeah.
perceptive, but you'll get the whole gamut because there's always someone out there who just has to be the first to say fucking something, right? And then you're just faced with trying to actually filter out what is actually of any use to you. But yeah,
Oh, it's funny. You've actually made me think now because like when I did your intro, I always like to sort of put stuff that I've been kind of thinking about, and I thought what, and then you've just made me think why am I doing that? Am I doing that? There's like a little bit of ego. I want to kind of share stuff or whatever. And I think back to like when I first started, like I was actually looking back at one of some of my early ones at what the sort of shit that I used to say, and, and it was. I'm sorry you got like the expanded version, but it was much more brief what I used to say. But I think that there's probably also something that um I didn't have the confidence or the sort of the self belief. I've always sort of struggled with like imposter syndrome, like all the way through my life. I've just not so much now. I probably lost that. I would say, or at least like the most part, probably about sort of 4 years ago. But I did kind of struggle with it a lot. But you just made me think like, why am I saying that?
well, doesn't everyone with any sense have some sort of imposter syndrome? I
Mm,
think not least because often when you launch yourself into something,
Yeah.
you you haven't tried it yet, so you don't know what it actually is. You know, the number of people who join a
Yeah.
band because they think what being a band is like, right?
Yeah.
And we all need that ignorance, otherwise most of us would never fucking do
Would
it,
never do
right?
it.
So you kind of need to have that sort of slightly,
Mm,
you know, I don't know, starry-eyed view of like, I don't know, writing a book, writing a
yeah.
song, doing whatever, launching yourself into some sort of career. Um,
Yeah.
oh my God, even having children. I mean, if you
Yeah.
actually knew what lay ahead, you'd go, fuck that, I'm not doing that, right? So you kind of have to have
Bonkers, isn't it?
that. And that
Yeah.
means that obviously when you actually start to encounter the reality of it, of course it feels like imposter syndrome because you think, God, am
Yeah.
I actually doing this right? Because it feels
Yeah.
fucking awful at this particular
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's weird actually with children. I mean, when mine was sort of first born with when Amber sort of first came, it was like I have no idea what's going on here. It was like I have no idea. So all that stuff that you'd read about, I don't know. It was just like you really kind of felt like you were just rudderless.
yeah, I mean, I think, I've got, I mean, my kids are now both in their 20s.
Mm,
Um, I think of all the parents and the conversations that I've had over the years and the concerns that people have and blah, blah, blah. And I've always thought, well, look, if there was a right way to do it, we'd all be
mm,
doing it. Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's why there's a million books and a million guides and a million different ways to kind of,
Mm,
approach these things because ultimately you almost have to try all of them a bit,
mm, mm,
oh, try it this way, try it that way, say this, say that,
yeah,
gentle parenting or strict parenting or time out or whatever the
yeah.
hell it is, these kind of little tips and tricks. Well,
Mm,
some things work, some things don't, depending on you, depending on the child, and you're
mm,
both kind of navigating your way through it. And I remember sort of thinking, you know, when I was raising my children, thinking, I'm supposed to know what I'm doing, and I really don't actually.
mm,
But then
mm.
I kind of was a bit more forgiving with myself. Well, I thought, well, this is my first time as well.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
can only
yeah,
try, and
yeah,
there's certain things. It feels really catastrophic because you feel like if you try something and it's the wrong thing, that
yeah.
would leave these scars forever,
Totally.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
it. I've ruined everything now. But
yeah,
I think that you just can't, it's impossible. It's
yeah,
impossible to be a perfect parent. So you try and you fail and you correct and you readjust and then you
yeah.
just have to be a bit forgiving with yourself, but
I
also not too rigid.
I think there's I mean there's probably like just such an instinct thing with parenting as well. That just sort of kicks in, and it's like I guess with a lot of things in life as well. There's an instinctive thing, and then there's a. I mean, I kind of like always had this like one side of my brain was like my instinct telling me things to do, and then there's the other side of my brain which was almost like kind of more analytical, if you will, and kind of thinking, well, if I do that, what about that, and and then you end up tying yourself in knots and fucking hitting yourself over the head, thinking, fucking make a decision. But I don't know. It's a weird thing. I've learned to trust my instinct a lot better, a lot more now. I rely on my instinct, and it's usually right, isn't it?
I mean, it
Do you
is and
think?
it isn't, I just think it's a state of constant flux.
Mm,
I think being open to listening to new ideas and filtering them through your experience. I mean, I tell you what, to me, experience is the key. It really
mm,
is, right?
yeah,
And also what works for one person just doesn't work for another, right?
true. Yeah.
So things like, I don't know, if you pick something really extreme, like I know quite wealthy people who have sent their children to boarding school when they were like 7,
Mm,
right? And I just remember thinking that is such a weird thing to do. What was the point in even having children
yeah,
if you're
I
just going to
know.
pass all them off? And I just
Yeah.
kept thinking of all the lovely moments I've had like with my kids and the
Mm.
shit ones, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
do you know
yeah,
what I mean? It's life. It's that thing that you are in a house together every
yeah.
day, schools,
Mm.
holidays, la la la, dealing with everything. And to kind of pass all that off and farm it out to an institution just seems really strange. But
It
I
does,
guess there
yeah.
was a time when people felt that that would give those children, maybe that's what those people think, that it will give them a better future, that it's
Mm.
actually good for them. I can't put myself in that headspace. I really can't.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
I understand why some people do it. Okay.
Mm.
I don't know. Maybe they are all the people who will be the world leaders in the future because they've been, I don't know. I don't know what magical thing happens at these boarding schools that
It's,
seems to work for them. I would argue it's the money that lies behind it. I wouldn't even
yeah,
bother
yeah,
sending them off. I think if you're that rich, then they'll be
yeah,
fine anyway. But
absolutely.
it's kind
I
of
know.
baffling, but it does make
It
me
is.
think,
I
oh,
agree.
should I have done this? Should I have been richer? Should I have been like the
Yeah.
sort of person who could give my kids that kind of start? And then if eventually I think it through and I think, no, I don't think I want a world full of people who have gone to boarding school. Those are the only people who exist. So I will just sit here and fight my corner. But I think every bit of parenting makes you go through those. Should I do this? Should I do that? I can't do that. I can't afford to do that. I haven't got the right personality to do that. So I'm
Mm.
just going to have to do it my way and try and do the best I can. And, this is where I think the internet can be kind of both helpful but also quite damaging in
Mm.
that for some reason my Instagram feed ends up being full of like, maybe I just like babies, but there's a lot of kind of, parenting and
Parenting
children
sort of
being
stuff.
funny.
Yeah.
And, I get these ridiculous little things. They're very cute, right? But someone is showing you kind of how lovely their kid is because they've used a particular way to talk them into something or stop them from doing something.
Uh,
And I think, great. Now show me the other 23 hours and 59 minutes because I
yes.
suspect that those didn't go so well,
I
right?
agree, definitely.
And it's all bollocks, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's like when you
Yeah.
talk to parents and those parents who are like, oh, I've never had that problem. My kids are
Oh,
fucking perfect. And you think, well, you're obviously lying to me because I've met your kid and he's a little shit. All right. So there's absolutely no way that's true. So whatever.
it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, it's that's the old sort of society pressure to, have this kind of like, perfection kind of image and perfect lifestyle and
And
things like
fear
that,
of being judged, the fear of being labeled a
Yeah, yeah,
failure, you
yeah.
know. And and to be fair, I think that's a huge amount of pressure on parents. I think
I think it
it's
is. Yeah. I mean, I don't, when I see that sort of stuff, I don't necessarily, unless the person is, well, I always think that's one thing actually. Sorry to, I'm not jumping around, but it kind of
go for it.
makes me think of these kind of competing emotions. So in those sort of situations, I don't really, I try my best not to sort of judge, people who put out stuff like that because, they've had whatever impact. And this is what I was talking about, your sort of self-awareness and, how, whatever has kind of like sort of happened in the past, has a knock-on effect. I mean, I can feel it from my things that happened to me in my childhood that have this kind of effect, and it makes you sort of behave a certain way. And if you don't have that sort of self-awareness, you're putting stuff out there that to other people will seem, what the fuck? What are they talking about? This is bullshit, But I think you have to have that empathy almost. And sometimes it's really, really hard because there are some terrible people around saying
I mean,
shit,
I think nobody goes out in the world wanting to be terrible,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I always kind of, I mean, maybe we live in an over analytical kind of era. I'm sort of quite guilty of that. I sort of end
yeah,
up normalizing things that
yes.
someone like Moose,
Mm,
my husband now, but will go like, well, that's bollocks. He's just a fucking arsehole. you know. And I'm like, yeah, but if you look back at what world he came from and blah blah blah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I think there is always a kind of understand, and not least because you think, well, you can be judged
Mm,
yourself,
yeah,
and when
yeah,
people judge you really harshly, it
yeah,
does feel really unfair and that people aren't accommodating for some of the
yeah,
difficulties that you may have had to deal with.
yeah.
But I think so that's what I mean about it being a constant thought process. I mean, I always think you'll never have the answers. It will always shift.
Mm,
Things will always change. The people around you will go through things that will make you color the way that you think about these things. But that to me is actually what life is all about. That
yes, it
idea
is.
that, well,
Yeah,
I just want the answer. I just want to know. It's like, you're
yeah,
never going to know. That's
yeah,
the
yeah.
point. All
Yes,
right.
yeah,
You
that is.
know?
That's very true. I think, yeah. I mean, I think we sometimes, yeah. I mean, I've been guilty of that, of kind of looking to you finish things off or put them so I can sort of put them into that kind of compartment in my mind that okay, that's finished. I've got the answer to that, and it's not like that. That's just like you're right. That's just that approach is just
Well, and
the
those everything is kind of confused by the
yeah,
world that changes around you. We don't live
yeah,
in a
yeah,
static environment.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
for instance, I think, the absolute sort of shitstorm of mental health in young people,
Mm,
right? I
mm,
think about this quite a lot. Um, and I do think, on the one hand, I look at things like, you know, I come from an era where when I was in my 20s and stuff, you almost didn't want to admit if you had any kind of weird shit going on in your head
absolutely.
because
Yeah,
it was, the word was just mad. Well, you're mad, right?
yeah,
And that
yeah,
meant
yeah.
that could
That was
mean
it. It was
anything
very cut and
from,
dried, wasn't it?
yeah, and you were
Yeah,
either sort of slightly ostracized or it could, at the very worst, you felt like you could be locked up somewhere,
yeah.
and it all felt a bit, Victorian, like you'd been
Yes,
somewhere,
it
like
did.
you were in a padded cell where they throw away the key, right? And so that kind of kept you from exhibiting too much kind
Yeah,
of weird shit and you try and hold it in,
yeah.
right? And, speaking as someone who, lost Chris, our drummer in
Mm,
Lush,
mm,
who killed himself when he was 30, and I
yeah.
sit there and I think, well, in a different world, where there was a bit more awareness and less stigma attached to that, would
Yeah.
he have got through this? Would he have survived? If people around him knew more about this stuff, would it have helped,
Mm,
And on the
yeah.
one hand, I do think, well, that would have been really good, but then I look at the current situation where I do genuinely see people who are, I think, a bit over medicalized,
Mm,
really young people, who are like 13 or whatever and being put on meds. And
mm,
there's a bit of me that thinks, in a bit of a Gen X way, like, are these kids that just need to act out for a while and
mm,
be,
mm.
a fucking pain in the ass, frankly, but
Yeah.
also really struggling and really sad and being a parent that feels that they can't reach them or help them, but that's part of their life process.
Mm,
And are
yeah.
we kind of putting a burden of a lifetime kind of diagnosis on
Yeah.
people who are only like 12 or 13 years old,
Yeah. And have still got that, like a lot of formation to do, without, wanting to sound patronizing, but still have a lot of, yeah, forming to, physically, mentally, and you're right. It
because
is a
I
it is
mean
a tough one. Go on.
I would speak as someone who, if I was growing up in the current world and I
I
went
was going
through
to
what I
say,
went through then, there is
yeah,
absolutely no question that I would have been put on or diagnosed
yeah,
with something and put on some sort of meds for
yeah,
sure, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
I just think I'm so glad I didn't have that. I could probably
mm,
have done with some therapy. I'm not going to
mm,
lie, that might have helped,
yeah,
right? Or some sort of
yeah,
psychiatric
mm,
evaluation. But I
mm,
think the idea of having to live the whole of my life kind of on whatever antidepressants or whatever meds, I think
Mm,
would have not been a
mm.
happy place for me now,
Well,
you know.
it's interesting because like my partner Saskia, she like her dad's Jamaican, mum's white English, and she suffered horrible racism when she was a kid. She's the same age as us, and but
I
she
suppose
said
especially being mixed race. Back
yes,
then, it was
exactly the
both
point.
sides, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah,
It was both
yeah.
sides, and there were obviously very few mixed race kids around at that. In the going to school in the sort of mid 70s, whatever, sort of through to the 80s.
Quite a lot in
And
London, I have to
yeah,
say.
probably more in London. Yeah, I mean, she grew up in Winchester. She was born in Winchester and went to like
Okay.
in that kind of like Basingstoke area. But later in life, I mean, probably 10 years ago, she started therapy. And that was that she would say that is the best thing that she's ever done. For kind of getting through. Obviously many years later, but probably at that time, yeah, it would have helped. I think you're right. Rather than going straight onto medication, doing some talking, and therapy would probably be of benefit.
Yeah, because I think my experience of therapy, um, which has more recently been a good one, right? So I started going to see someone because there were a few issues in my life.
Mm,
And it's not a kind of, you know, I don't know, like there was a bit of me trying to find some deep, dark problem that maybe was the source of all my issues. And then,
mm,
and actually what I found, I mean, it's more counseling than psychoanalysis or something.
yeah.
And I think that actually what I was after was someone who was going to say, no, that's normal. That's a
Yes,
normal
yes.
response
Yeah, yeah,
to the
yeah,
pressures that are around you. And
yeah.
you're just coping with that. And, there might be some behaviors that you maybe need to change because
Yeah.
they're things that may have worked when you were a child, but you're not actually in that space anymore. So you kind of could
Mm,
drop some of that. But
yeah.
actually, it's that idea that it's not you that's wrong. It's just that you're dealing with a bunch of pressures. Now, to me, navigating your way through difficult times is the best kind of version of therapy. I
Mm,
absolutely do understand that there are people with deep-seated and actual physical
yeah.
and things that are only treatable, right, with
Mm,
medication because they are quite extreme psychological conditions. I absolutely accept that. I
yeah.
just think that there is kind of an overdiagnosis of things that sometimes I look at that I think, yes, it's making you unhappy. I absolutely get that. And maybe you need some help with that part of it to sort of hold
Mm,
back the despair. But I actually think that a lot of your behavior is a perfectly normal response to certain things that are happening to you at
yeah.
this time, you know.
No, I think you're right with that. I mean, like we said, before we started recording, I'm an only child, and I kind of like got through. I didn't have a bad childhood by any means, but I had different things that impacted me. It's all relative, isn't it? As to how you find your level and find your kind of normality. And there were definitely some things I wish somebody had been around to say, yeah, what you're thinking is and what you're feeling is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That is normal because there's an element of you that wants to fit in, that wants to be kind of accepted and not kind of stand out in a bad way. Yet there's that part of you that wants the individuality, that you want to find your own sort of identity. And sometimes those kinds of I found cause very sort of conflicting sort of feelings. And I didn't really, my parents weren't the sort of people that I would talk to about deep stuff. So
Nobody's were back then. The
no,
world has changed.
it
We
was
now know way more about our
way more.
kids
Yeah.
than our parents knew about us. I mean,
I,
there
t-
was just that was not a thing that people did. Like, oh, I'm going to talk to my dad about, some
yeah.
fucking boyfriend or something
Yeah.
in
Oh,
any kind
yeah.
of meaningful sense apart from where we went to on the weekend. Like, fuck off.
I I remember I had like when so I went to study in Liverpool in like 86 and I'd written a letter to one of my schoolmates. You know, he was studying up in Glasgow, and I hadn't posted it. I'd forgotten to post it. You know, so I came home at Christmas, first Christmas after my first term. You know, and my mum went through my fucking bag and found this
Aye.
letter. God Almighty, she didn't speak to me for 3 days. She didn't speak to me for three
What
days.
the
My
fuck was
dad,
in it?
it wasn't great. Some of the stuff that I've been up to. It wasn't great, you know, but I was like 3 days of, you know, sort of not speaking to me. But that was her, that was the way that she dealt with things. You know, it was like, and that has I've had to work hard to lose that in myself. You know, if I get sort of pissed off with something, you know, is to for years, you know, my kind of thing was just to sort of kind of shut down. You know, and I got that from her, but I still thought at the time, like 3 days, that's a bit excessive, isn't it? You know, it's not. I mean, it's
I
not
mean, I
great as a
guess.
mum sort of hearing this stuff, you know, reading this stuff, but
I mean, the difficulty is it's quite difficult to be open with kids even now, right? So
mm,
I've got some sympathy with your mother because I've had conversations with my kids where maybe some issue has come up, and I've had to say, well, this is going to be very difficult because I'm your mother, right?
yeah,
I am going to have an immediate instinct to either want to fix it, protect you, or overstep a boundary. You just want to talk about this stuff, right? And as you're
mm,
talking about it, there are fucking sirens going off in my head that are
yeah,
making me
yeah,
panic and get really upset. Okay,
yeah,
so maybe I'm not the right person to talk to. I'm
mm,
very happy to discuss it, but you also have to understand that my response will be guided by the fact that it's very hard for me to be objective about this,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and and
It's true.
and and that is part of it. That's why I do
Yeah,
think that, hey, maybe therapy helps. Equally, I would argue, I mean, I have known people who have been in therapy for half their fucking lives and it hasn't made a
yeah.
jot of difference, right? Where there is a point where the talking has to stop,
I
right?
stop.
Why
Yeah,
don't you
yeah,
fucking go out and do something about
yeah,
it?
yeah,
And like I say, all of these things, the boundaries are very blurred. There is no kind of perfect solution. There are things that you can try and they might help, but there
yeah,
is a tipping point where this is not helping. You seem to be caught in a stasis where you're just talking
yeah,
and talking and talking about something and never
yeah,
fucking doing anything to change it. Like,
yeah, yeah. That's very true. Talking about just while we're talking about Liverpool, just sort of quick sort of story. So I first saw Lush in uh I think it was 89. You supported the Darling Buds back in Liverpool, right? And it's a bit hazy because I was in a bit of a sort of post-student fug. You know, I was still I'd finished, I graduated, and I was just starting work at a job that I hated. But I still, you know, so I was still going to gigs. I was still pretending that I was a student, but I had to go to work the next day, which was like ridiculous. Anyway, so I was I was working in this I was working in this accountant's office, right? And the main partner there was I always knew he was a bit dodgy, but I wasn't sure. I didn't realize how dodgy he was. But he basically had he had these sort of two elderly women sort of come to his office. They had a business together, you know, so they were like kind of, you know, had a partnership, and so they came around. He brought them into his office to review their accounts and stuff like that. And he went to get their file, and it was his secretary that told me that he basically opened this door and all these porn mags fell out right at the feet of these two clients.
wow.
Oh
I mean,
my
that's
God.
going some if it's in your
Oh,
workplace.
in
What,
your
so he'd like,
workplace.
so when
Yeah,
the door shut, he'd knock one off, like in the kind of interim.
basically. Basically, yeah. Shocking.
God,
Oh
isn't
dear.
that? It's so funny, isn't it? Because that's like seen as such a modern phenomenon, that kind of porn addiction. But
Yeah,
I would argue that that's a porn addiction. If my God, if you
that
can't even
is
get through a working day without having some jazz mags
some
in front
jazz
of you,
mags and
like.
sort of quite easily to hand. Yeah, so to speak. Oh God! I'll tell you what. One thing I was kind of thinking about when I read your book, right, and it was when I first started listening to to Lush sort of back in the day. I had no idea what was. I was just listening to the music. I had no idea what was kind of going on with you and the band. I didn't really. I kind of stopped reading the music press in the probably towards the end of the 80s. I just kind of got fed up with it because it just went a bit shit. So I stopped. I just didn't know what was kind of going on. But then and so I have so for years, I had this kind of like listening to your music, and this is how my kind of mind works. Listening to your music brought me sort of certain emotions, which I think were based on my life. Because you I guess kind of attach it to your own life. And then when I read your book, I was like, fuck, right. It gave me a completely different perspective. It was yeah, kind of quite mind bending. And I think I
Yeah,
was I
but
was right.
see, I think that is the thing about music. I was always a little bit wary. I mean, now again, everyone's like, oh, can you put the lyrics up online? And what was
Mm,
that song about? And la la la.
mm,
And to me, it's always a bit like, well, I mean, how much do you I mean, I get it. If you're curious about what that specific meaning is to
mm,
me, I get it. It kind of spoils it though, because I
mm,
do think, hey, the person writes a song, the person expresses something. Then it goes through this transitional period where it's released. And once it's released and someone adopts it and listens to it, and especially when they take it to their heart, then it means something to them
mm.
specifically,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I have had songs like that where someone has started talking about what the song is about, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to hear this because I had a
yeah,
whole different idea about what this song was about that is
yeah,
relevant to my life,
yeah.
and that's mine now, right?
Mm,
And
mm,
it's yours as well, but this is now mine. And so, it's like when people sit there and cancel someone, oh, you can't listen to Morrissey anymore because he's a wanker or whatever. And
yeah,
I've always said, no, 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 those songs are mine now. They're part of my
yeah.
life. They mean something to me. I'm not going to just fucking jettison them because someone
Mm,
chooses to grow old and behave in a way that people don't like. It's
yeah.
got nothing to do with that, right?
Mm,
And I think that's the point of art and creativity. That is the magical transformation, is that it doesn't have to be like, oh, but you're reading this song wrong. It's about
yeah,
this. It doesn't
yeah,
matter. It's
yeah,
mine now, and
yeah.
it means what I want it to mean, and it
Yeah,
triggers emotions in me that are important. So I think, it can be a fascinating sort of aside to discover what the actual genesis of that poem or that song or that lyric
mm,
is. But actually, these are two separate things. you
yeah.
know
Well, I think as well. Like I mean, there are some songs now that I can't listen to. It's not because of kind of cancel culture or anything like. It's because I was listening to them at a time and a place, where I wasn't in a good place, and it's still kind of quite painful to listen to them. So I've sort of stopped listening to them. I find it quite difficult, and that,
Oh,
in a way,
really?
it's yeah, and it's I I'm sad that I can't listen to them, or I can't listen to them in the same way. I mean, sometimes they're unavoidable. You just kind of come across them, but in a way, one hand I'm disappointed, but on the other hand, I'm kind of quite happy because music does that to you. It kind of just creates those such strong reactions,
Yeah, but see,
inside of
I
you.
see that's interesting because I really love that about it.
Yeah,
I think we did a little tour with Lowell Tolhurst,
yeah,
and he was kind of focusing a lot on the kind of pornography era
mm,
so he was playing like, with his band doing Strange Day. I think I was gonna, oh no, I did the vocal for Strange Day when we did it live. And I
yeah,
thought, all right, I'll relearn this song anyway. So I was listening to that album and absolutely threw me back to when I was probably what? I don't know, 16, 17 years
Yeah.
old maybe.
Yeah.
And viscerally could remember just sitting on my own in the bedroom and kind of how tortured I felt at the time, how very, very,
Yeah.
very sad I could feel.
Mm.
Um, and actually it made, I kind of quite treasured that because it reminded me of who I was back
Yeah.
then in a really visceral way. And it didn't
Yeah.
make me sort of think, it actually made me think, oh well, isn't it great that I'm not that person anymore? But also
Yeah.
how young I was and how
Mm.
overwhelming things felt. And it made me kind of, that makes me understand how a lot of young people feel when they're
Yeah.
very tortured and very upset,
Yeah.
and you want to sort of say, look, it will get better, I
It will get
promise
better.
you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
actually hearing music from that era to me actually reminds me that that is true. It will get better. I know exactly how you're feeling because I only have to listen to this song to remember exactly how that felt.
Well, yeah. It's interesting how, yeah, how that works, because some of the stuff that I can't listen to is not from sort of way back when. It's more recent. I mean, some of it's, kind of going back to the 90s. Not much, more kind of recent than that. Um, and that so stuff that reminds me of like childhood, going back to the 80s, that sort of pornography era. Yeah, I have the same kind of thing. It's almost like that part of me has sort of passed, and I've accepted that has shaped as shaped who I am today. That is still me. It's still a part of me. And maybe like some of the other stuff that's come later, maybe I haven't accepted that, which is why I find it harder to listen to it. I don't
I
know.
mean, I think that, when you talk about empathy and, how important it is, I think it is absolutely vital to remember the worst times of your life and the worst aspects of how you might
Yeah,
have
yeah.
behaved at that time,
Yes, yeah,
because that is the
yeah.
thing that makes you understand what someone else is going through
Mm,
and
mm,
how they might be able to climb out of that. Or, do
yeah,
you know what I mean? And
I
and
do. Yeah,
I don't know if you ever read Kurt Vonnegut, right? I
yeah.
used to love his books, and he had this, and the millions of ideas that are in those books. There was these aliens who were from this planet called Tralfamador,
Mm,
and they would see people that the way they saw people was not as a single entity, but almost like this sort of chain. Like you've got that evolution of man
yes, yeah, yeah,
drawing.
yeah,
That's how
yeah,
they saw people, as like
yeah,
everything that they have been over their
yeah,
lifetime. So there's this kind of trail following you around of all
yeah,
the different things and people that you've been, right? And I really love that idea because I think that is actually the truth. You are present, we're sitting here talking to each other. I see you as you are now, but
yeah,
actually there is this whole chain of stuff behind you of
yeah.
that is
Totally,
really unique, of the things that you went through and the ways that you responded to
absolutely.
that. And to me, that's actually really key about kind of having a relatively happy life, is being able to look back at all the things that you've done and the
Yeah,
people that you've been and
yeah,
accept that and own it, and not trying
absolutely.
to make it perfect and not try and reinvent yourself and not try and cut away the bits that you can't face. But
Yeah,
actually, that's literally who you are. That's all your
yeah, yeah.
experiences. So I
Totally. No, that I mean that's a really great point, and I completely agree. I think yes, that I often think about that, in terms of my own, and I'd be interested in your view on this, like my own kind of identity, how that has changed. Um, like when I was a kid, I was really shy, and I just had this sort of like inherent shyness. I mean, I'm an introvert, and that's kind of my nature, and you never lose that. Although I've adapted. I live with it, and it's fine. 99% of the situations that I'm in, I'm totally fine with. There'll be the odd one where, I'll go into, and this comes back to perhaps that sort of imposter syndrome again, but, occasionally sort of situations where I go into a room where it's full of people that perhaps I don't know, and I'll be like, "Do you know what? I'd rather not be here." there's just like that little voice in my head, but I'm usually okay. It's there is still some of that, but again, over the years, my identity has certainly shifted, and I think for a part of it, I felt like there was almost like a double life of one that I had when I was kind of working, and then there's this other life that of at the time was kind of like aspirational stuff that I wanted to do, but didn't feel like I was in the right position to do it. And eventually that kind of happened, and here we are. I'm
Well,
doing
I
this.
mean, I would argue there's a difference between being shy and having self-confidence,
Mm,
right? Because I was cripplingly shy when I
yeah,
was young. I mean, almost to the point of some sort of treatable phobia. Like I couldn't even get on the
yeah,
bus and ask for the fare.
yeah,
I used to walk around with like pocketfuls of small change, so I never used to have to talk to
yeah.
anyone,
Oh my God,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And just the sound of my own voice made me cringe, you know what I mean?
yeah.
So and it was kind of it was more to do with a lack of self-confidence and a kind of overwhelming fear, I suppose.
Good point.
Because
Yeah.
certainly, I think most people, when they say that they're introverts, well, yeah, they're kind of shy in kind of social situations,
Mm,
but they're not introverted with their own family or
yeah,
with the
yeah,
people they know well. They're cracking
yeah,
the jokes and they're fucking
yeah, yeah.
talking about all sorts, aren't
True.
they? You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
and
yeah.
everybody you ask, I mean, it's quite funny, like loads of people like to say that I think people say, oh, I'm an introvert or I'm an extrovert because they have an idea in their head of what that is. I'm not
Yeah.
sure that that's the truth. So
It's
people
true.
always put the kind of the burnished side. So they say, oh, I'm an extrovert.
Good
Hey, I'm a
point.
popular person. Like people love
Yeah,
me. La la la.
yeah,
Or I'm an introvert. Oh, I think deeply about things. I'm not like these loud people. I'm kind of like, thoughtful and deep. And
yeah,
we all like to sort of aspire to being the best of what it is. But
yeah,
actually, most people are kind of quite chatty with their friends. They're a bit
yeah,
shy in social situations, which is a completely acceptable thing.
yeah,
Why wouldn't you be? I mean, it's a
yeah.
bit weird to walk into a room full of strangers and just start fucking yelling your head off. And do you know what I mean? And it would be
Yeah,
weird if you were
absolutely.
surrounded by your family and you were too crippled to speak anything. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? So
absolutely.
at the end of the day, we're all bloody introverted and
It's true.
extroverted.
Yeah, so I mean that's a good point. Again about how these words have sort of been defined, and we kind of take them. It's like it's kind of like I guess it's like in an analogy, it would be like kind of music genres. How we like to put things in boxes, and it's like with people, with you're an introvert or you're extrovert. Well, it's maybe a little bit more nuanced than that, and I think you're right. I think we're perhaps sort of realizing that we should realize that more, and because like you have a definition of what somebody is, it's bollocks, really, isn't
They're
it?
never that thing
They're never
completely.
that. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
There was quite a funny Derren Brown episode years and years ago where he had like a bunch of people and he gave them like a kind of horoscope thing,
Mm,
right? So they all told them their birthday.
yeah.
He kind of, gave them this, fucking 3 sheets of paper of A4, like with this real analysis of who they were. And then
Mm.
they filmed it and they were like, oh my God, he's absolutely got me. They were like, yeah, 90%. Right. Everyone had the same fucking bit of paper. Okay. And it's all kind of like, well, you're kind of you're extroverted, like, you're in certain situations, you're this, in other situations, but at the same time, you do think deeply and you are quite shy. Yes, we're all that. We're all of those things, right? We can be fucking horrible and we can be nice. We can be friendly and we can be unfriendly. Depends if
Mm,
you've got, what your situation is and what the environment is. And we're
yeah.
capable of all of those things. People love to say, oh no, I'm this kind of person. I could never
Mm,
do that. I could never be this. I bet you fucking could,
bet you
given the
could.
right
Yeah,
circumstances,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know. I mean,
I mean,
I grew up with like, a Hungarian dad.
mm,
Hungary in the 70s when I went to visit. It's quite anti-Semitic, they were on the
mm,
wrong side of the war, let's face it.
mm,
And it
yeah,
always fascinated me that people in Britain, were so sure of their kind of right side identity, that they were like, oh, if I'd have lived in, I would have been part of the French resistance. I would have, shielded Jews from the concentration. I would have like hid them in my, basement. I would have done that.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, would you though? I mean, really, it's
Mm.
not that you don't know that that's the right thing to do, but how courageous are you? And how
Yes.
how
Yeah.
reckless are you actually? If you
Yeah.
had children and a family, would you have put them at risk by doing
Yeah.
those things? I mean, it's so much
It's
more
very true.
complicated.
It's really complicated. Yeah, you're totally right. Totally right with that. I think it's very easy in those situations where you're removed from it, and there's a kind of safety, isn't there? Knowing that either you can't go back in time or you're so distant from it. You can say those sort of things without
Yeah.
any repercussion or anything, no chance of it happening. Nobody's going to say, "Right, come on then, let's go."
And
You know?
it's a great thing that that is there as a kind of moral guidance. Look at
Mm,
this appalling thing that happened in the past,
mm,
the way that we should behave if any whiff of that happens in the future, that we should remember that and behave differently.
yeah,
But, until you're tested, it you can't know, and
yeah, yeah.
people are
True.
kind, people can be immensely cruel, you know,
Yeah,
even through inactivity, right?
yeah.
You know what I mean? All of us have that burden of watching wars going on around the world and
Yeah,
still getting on with our lives and thinking, oh, well, what can I do? Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
And at the same time, how can you not? What are you supposed to do? Just, are we all supposed to go over and fight, or are we supposed to be overwhelmed with despair? I mean, it's really hard, isn't it?
yes, it
Navigating
is.
through life.
Navigating through life. Yeah, well, this is the thing, especially now, as it kind of feels like the world changes so quickly. At a pace I don't think any of us have experienced before, and it's hard to. It's just so hard getting shit done these days, isn't it? As well, and the complexity of it. It's really I find it really hard.
Well, and then I think back to what you were probably saying in the opening about that kind of self-awareness and
Yeah.
knowing yourself and questioning yourself. Again, I see, I don't know, I mean, a lot of the online world, I think, it's kind of, a lot of it is slagged off. There are things that I see that I think, are quite self-aware. I see an awful lot of absolute nonsense. I mean, I think the number of times I've seen people literally in full caps screaming, be kind, when they
Mm.
are anything but kind,
But
right?
God, yeah,
Just as one
yeah.
example. And, I think people's hypocrisy is completely understandable. We all want to
Mm.
be something. We all know the thing that we want to be, but
Yeah.
achieving that is almost impossible.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, there's even the thing with religion. I mean, it's that idea that, oh, I can't, the world is a terrible place, so I'm going to become a monk and I'm going to, I don't know, sit on top of some pole and meditate. Well, what good is that bloody doing anyone? I mean, that's a retreat, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. To my
Like,
mind, it is. Yeah.
well, yeah. So, I understand the kind of purity and the wish to sort of contemplate and encourage that
Mm.
sort of pontification, but fucking useless to someone like me,
Yeah.
and you've only got one life. I'm not religious myself, so I don't believe in reincarnation. I don't believe in a heaven. I do
Yeah.
think you've got one life and you need to get, elbow deep in it and
Mm.
do the best that you can. But it is messy and it is flawed, and we are all imperfect.
Yeah.
But that's the experience.
That's the experience, isn't it? I mean, I mean, I know this is probably sort of like a big. It's not a question, but like a big sort of topic. I mean, how have you? What do you think for yourself? How have you kind of got through? From sort of obviously your time in Lush is sort of as you documented that so well. Like after that, sort of moving into kind of like your sub editing and stuff. How how did that transition work, and then what do you think you've kind of really learnt over that time?
I mean, to be honest, when Lush ended, it was kind of, it was a sort of absolute guillotine because of Chris's
Mm,
death. And
mm,
I suddenly found myself at the age of 30 thinking, fuck, what do I do now? I mean,
yeah,
I've always been someone who likes working.
yeah,
So I was quite prepared. I can remember thinking, well, I could be a cleaner. I can do that. And at the time, Moose did like a TEFL course teaching
yeah,
English as a foreign language.
yeah,
So we were like putting up signs in libraries in the local area, and loads of people misunderstood. I had like, it's a very kind of diverse part of London. So there were lots of sort of, you know, kind of families with English as a second language who were suddenly
yeah.
contacting him and going, "Oh, can you give English lessons?" And it's like, it's not that kind of,
Not
it's
quite.
not
Yeah,
school
yeah.
English, it's foreign, blah, blah, blah. So I
Mm,
was like, all right, fuck it, I'll do it. I'm sure I can like give like 6-year-olds help with their English homework, you know
yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean, and a bit of
yeah,
spelling. So I
yeah.
actually did that for a while,
Mm,
and I quite enjoyed it. And then a
mm,
mate was working at listings in IPC.
mm,
So she got me a job there, and I
mm.
just started freelancing there, and it was great. Fuck me, the money was
You enjoy
unbelievable.
that?
Like,
Yeah,
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 I really
yeah,
enjoyed it. I really liked kind of, it was kind of silly. It was like TV listings. So I remember having to do like, I don't know, 800 episodes of Last of the Summer Wine or something,
yeah, yeah,
writing
yeah,
news précis.
yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed it. And that's how I got into subbing. And I just like the workplace camaraderie as well. It
Mm,
was quite liberating to be in a job where you clock on and clock off, and I don't have to take it home with me.
got
And
you.
I'm not
Yeah,
lying awake at night, which I had done in Lush, worrying about the relationships within the band, worrying about the record label, worrying about the manager, worrying about the tour, how we're
yeah,
going to
yeah,
survive, worrying about the competition, worrying about the reviews. None of it.
yeah,
I just
yeah,
go into work. I do my job. I really
yeah,
like the people there. We go out afterwards and possibly go to the pub and get pissed. Fuck me,
yeah.
this is great. And
This
I
is
get
great.
paid.
Yeah,
Shit. Right. And it meant I could have children
yeah,
because you get maternity leave and I had
yeah.
holidays. Oh my God. What? I get paid to go on holiday.
Go on holiday, and I don't have to
Amazing.
think about work while I'm away, and it's
No.
brilliant. Yeah.
And I loved it. And actually, it was a really, I mean, I was so glad that I'd had that experience with Lash.
Mm,
But also, I tell you what was quite a funny thing was when I started to have the children, and then the money pressures were a lot. Having children is
yeah,
unbelievably expensive,
yeah.
right?
Especially in London.
Oh my God,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
the pressures of that. And also, it was kind of early 2000s when
Mm,
you really noticed that wages were just stagnating and the cost of living was just going up, and property and
yeah.
all of that was getting more and more expensive. And I do remember thinking, if I'd have left school and gone, if I hadn't fucked around with this band, you know what I mean? If I'd have gone
Mm,
straight into like publishing, I
mm,
could probably be like a, deputy editor by now. I'd have a really
mm,
decent wage and possibly a cushy number. And I was kind of a bit regretful and maybe a little bit
mm,
bitter about that and thinking
mm,
I've kind of fucked my life up a bit. But then fast forward another couple of decades and I'm sitting here now. Publishing has gone down the fucking pan, right?
yeah,
There's no
yeah,
bloody jobs. Magazines are folding. No one's buying them,
yeah.
right?
True. Yeah.
Most subbing work is online and it's fucking shit. And they'll probably get AI to do it in the
I was going to
future
say it's all
anyway.
probably AI now as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
And now
yeah.
I'm back doing music and I think, God, well, if I hadn't had that whole experience in Lush, there's no way I'd be doing this now.
Yeah, that's true.
So
Yeah,
again, the whatever, the rich tapestry and the whatever, but you don't know where it
it's true.
takes me. And so however I felt when I was in my mid 30s and the children were being born, I now feel completely different. And I think, well, thank God I spent, 8 years mucking about in a band and trying and failing and having all the kind of, mad shit go on, because now
Yeah.
I'm here and playing gigs and releasing music, and it's really good fun.
But I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, you know all that stuff like you say, about that you mentioned about kind of trying things, failing. I mean that's what everybody talks about what you need in life to kind of grow, as a person, isn't it? You need to be prepared to fail, and it's hard because you don't always see it at the time. It's like fuck
Failing
that
is
up,
key.
but you have to do. You have to go
I mean,
through that.
I tell you what, I notice it more now in a younger generation. And I think what's interesting is when we were in the kind of early 80s or whatever,
Mm,
as or even the late 80s, like, you're talking about a job that you had in Liverpool that was a shit job,
mm,
and you were having a shit time or whatever, right?
yeah,
But I think at the time, people like us just ping-ponged around in jobs and tried and failed. There was very high unemployment at the time, so you took
yeah,
what
yeah,
you could find.
absolutely, yeah.
Um, Whereas now, I do notice a lot of young people who seem to feel that they need to have this career path, right? That,
Interesting.
in our day, yes, if you were a doctor, yes, if you were,
Yeah,
certain types of job, yes. But if
yeah,
you've done a fucking English degree or something, there's no fucking
yeah.
career path there apart from unless
No,
you become a teacher, right?
yeah,
So you were
yeah.
aware that you were going to have to like kind of ping pong around and find something. I know people who ended up in the civil service, you know what I mean, and
Mm,
actually ended up with very good jobs. There's absolutely no way they knew that what was going to happen when they
yeah,
started doing an
yeah,
English degree,
yeah.
right? And I do worry a bit about young people who are like, well, I'm supposed to be in this job. I'm supposed to be earning the money. I'm supposed to be, you know, with a partner who's going to,
Mm,
be my forever partner. You know, there's no
wow.
fucking around or seeing who's available or
Yeah.
going out and losing your shit and having terrible relationships and one after another till you find the right person. No, it's got to be now. Everything is a disaster. If I'm not on track, it's a disaster.
Wow.
And
Right.
and I think that lack of resilience, that expectation that life is just this path that you follow, and every wrong turn is an actual catastrophic mistake,
Mm,
that feels a bit new, right? Because to
yeah.
me, the mistakes are the important
Yeah.
bit. I
Yeah.
did not, as a 14-year-old, think that I would be in a band. I didn't even think it when I was doing my degree, right?
Yeah.
And when I was
Yeah.
in a band, I did not think for a minute that I would end up being a sub. I didn't even think I'd have children, right?
Mm,
So
mm,
the most significant parts of my life have been completely accidental, right? And they have
yeah.
put me on a path to something that I would not have predicted in any way at all, right?
Wow.
And that to me is the key thing to think about when you're that young and you think, well, this is where I'm supposed to be. Well, maybe it isn't. It
Mm,
speaks of a
mm,
huge lack of imagination. If you think that your life is meant to be meet someone at 18, get married to them, get a job on a kind of steady career path, have a house, have a this, have a that, retire, play golf. I mean, what the fuck? Then you might as well just kill yourself now. That is not a life, right? The life bit,
yeah.
the exciting bit is the what the fuck just happened? How did I climb out of that
Yeah.
situation? How did I end up here? Seize the day, literally.
That is wild. That is totally wild because and I say that and I hear you with it actually because think about my two. There's a similarity of of that outlook, I think. And the world is just not like that. And almost like that attitude that you described there is is what it was like for my parents, right? And for a lot of people, in that area that where I lived in Lancashire was it's like this three stage. You go to school if you're lucky, you work, and then you retire, and that's it. That actual way of living isn't like that anymore.
I mean,
And
it
but
is.
and
It
it's
can
fascinating.
be. You
But
know,
it's
if you
interesting.
if you already know what you want to do, if you want to become a doctor or you want to
Mm,
become a surgeon, that's a fucking long path, right?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
presumably you're doing it because you actually love it. And every stage of that development, when you're a junior doctor, when you get your own practice, when you do this,
yeah,
when you do that, you're going to love all of that because it's actually the
yeah,
thing you want to do. Right. If you've
yeah,
done art, okay,
yeah,
and unless you have already in your head that you want to be some commercial designer or an animator or
yeah,
whatever the fuck, you already know. Most of us don't. We have no idea.
mm,
You don't do an English degree because you want to be a writer for
yeah,
sure,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That is
yeah,
not how that works. So
yeah,
the point is that you already are the sort of person who doesn't know exactly what where you want to be or what you want to do. And there's an
mm,
awful
mm,
lot of us. Some
mm,
people absolutely do know. They have met the person that they know they want to spend the rest of their lives with. And
yeah,
that is
yeah,
fucking amazing. I'm so happy for you. But
yeah.
for a lot of us, that is not the case.
It's not
And
the
what
case.
worries me is people who are young, who are in exactly that situation, who, having got their degree and, graduated, now are sitting at home not doing anything because they've applied for the jobs that they think they're supposed to do. And to
Mm,
me, it's like, go and work in a fucking bar, right? Go and do Amazon deliveries, do whatever the fuck you need to do, but get out there because
yeah,
something will come up. You
yeah,
don't really know what you want to do yet. So
yeah,
just
yeah,
get out there and let something happen to you. But I
yeah.
think people are quite crippled by the expectation of who they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to achieve. And that I think is really regressive.
Where do you think that's come from?
I think it's come from, I mean, look, I get that schools used to, I think when we were growing up, in the environment of when films like Kess were being made,
Oh yeah,
there was
yeah,
that idea of, young people from certain backgrounds being consigned to a career path. Or you
yeah.
can't explain, you won't escape going down pit,
Go
I
down the
mean?
pit. Yeah,
That's your
yeah, yeah.
future.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so we then wanted to have an educational environment where you could tell young people, look, you can be anything. You can be
Mm,
whatever you want to be. The problem
mm,
is that that's not actually true,
mm.
right? You can't be anything.
Anything. Yeah,
You can have your dreams, but
yeah.
actually, and I do think my kids have said that, oh my God, from year seven onwards, it was all about pathways. What's
Mm,
your GCSE pathway? What's your A level pathway? What's going to come next? You have to have this long view into the future of what the decision to take French or Spanish is going to mean.
yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah, yeah,
ridiculous,
yeah, yeah.
and like and I do think it was always about this career building, and I absolutely understand the good intention of that. I just think it's a fucking fantasy, you know. It's a reassuring thing to tell kids that, oh, if you do well in this exam, this is going to
Yeah.
set you up for life. It's not, by the
It's not.
way. It really isn't. It's a good
Really isn't.
start.
Yeah,
It's a good
but
start.
it's not your kind of
No,
free
because
ticket.
equally, if you fuck up your GCSEs and your A levels, believe me, there are still ways to get through that. Don't worry.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah. Absolutely.
It will be a little bit harder, but you'll get through it. Don't worry.
Do you
And
think this is do you think this is having a kind of damaging effect on kids? Because I in terms of it's all very serious from a very early age, isn't it? Like the seriousness of kind of finding that path and making the pressure of making sure that that works. It's kind of I don't know. Just my first thought is that it's taking away some of that. I don't know if playfulness is the right word, but that it's just all very serious, you know.
I mean, I kind of see that it's reassuring, right? If you can say to a kid, oh, I don't know, I mean, maybe because I don't find it reassuring, but I kind of see how it can be placating to say, you know. if you do well in your exams, then the rest of your life will be fine and you will
Yeah.
make money and you'll be secure. Okay.
Mm.
The problem
Mm.
is I think it's a lie. And I don't think it's a stopping point. Yes, this is important. Yes, you should pass your exams. This is an opportunity. You're surrounded by teachers and you're in an educational establishment where you can better yourself. You can learn something. So don't fuck around, right?
Mm.
And pass the
Mm.
exam if you possibly can, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the idea that this is going to, and like I get the reassurance of it. The
Mm.
problem is I think that the reassurance can become its own trap because it
Yeah.
feels like, well, I passed my exam, so come on then, where's this amazing job?
Mm.
Oh, that is not
Mm.
going to come your
It's not
way.
going to come. Yeah.
First of all, a lot of those jobs are people who are actually infinitely more well connected than you or your
Yes.
parents are,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
let's just accept that for a minute,
Yeah.
right?
It's very
The
true.
world is unfair. So if you
Yeah.
want that kind of job or that experience, you are going to have to go out and get it in a completely different way because it is definitely not going to just fall into your lap.
Yeah.
I can tell you that now. And
Completely
that's not a
agree.
problem because
Yeah.
for those people who do have those connections where they can get that cushy job, they
Mm.
won't have experienced anything else. Whereas you can, you
Yeah.
can go out into the world and you can try different things, and that will be
Mm.
infinitely more enriching than
Mm.
being told by a parent who has fixed you up with a job, this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Interesting. It's really interesting. Like thinking about the yeah, that it's almost like there's kind of like when you have those goals almost of kind of career, house, partner, whatever. I don't know. It's like you become. I think that like the way that our brains work, it's very easy for you to become fixated on those, and it's like a recipe for disappointment when you don't achieve it, and also when you've achieved one, two, three of those things, then what comes next? What else are you gonna then kind of target? I just have this thing with kind of goal setting that it becomes a bit of a you become a bit bound to them. And
Well,
if things don't go your way, you're gonna be fucking pissed off.
and also we're back to that idea of when you haven't done something, when
Yeah.
you have a goal that you don't really know anything about, and that's partly why you can embark on it, like we were
Mm,
saying, if you actually knew what that path would involve, you probably wouldn't even put the first foot down, right? And you'd go,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
fucking hell, I'm not doing that, right?
yeah.
But that's the point, is that when you have that goal has to change as you go along that path. So
Mm,
people, for instance, I always used to have this with bands. I never understood that idea of like, yeah, one day we're going to be playing Wembley Stadium. Now, fair
yeah,
play to Oasis. That is actually exactly what happened to them. So well
yeah,
done. You
yeah,
actually achieved that goal. For
yeah,
most of us, first of all, that's not going to happen,
yeah,
right? Not least because you find yourself suddenly in a position, as Lush did, where you're being kind of coerced towards making a certain type of music in order to achieve that goal, right?
yeah, yeah.
Can't you? And this was never from 4AD. This is much more from like management and that kind of
Mm,
thing. Of like, well,
mm,
why don't you write a song that's more like this? Why don't you sound more like the Cranberries? Why don't you do that? Why don't you make your songs a bit more universal or write about the internet or something so that there's a kind of, you could have a hit that way? And you're just looking at this person going, because that would mean that I don't want to do the thing that I'm doing. Right
yeah,
now, you've taken away the entire point of me doing this. So,
yeah,
why would I still want to go along that path? And that's the point. The goal, I want to play Wembley, means having to change
yeah,
everything you do in order
yeah.
to get to that goal. Very, very few people manage to do it without compromising, but most
Mm,
of us have to compromise because if that's what you want to do, then you
mm,
do have to change what you are doing to get there. And that's why I think for a lot of people, reaching the goal is quite hollow because they've had to kind of abandon and jettison all kinds of things that got them into that thing in the first place. Right.
yes, yeah, yeah.
I know people who are doctors who work in the NHS, and, I'm always curious, how come you didn't become like a private consultant? Because
Mm,
God knows you would have made a shitload more money
yeah, yeah,
because they
yeah,
have principles, because they're like,
yeah.
I, I I want to work in the NHS. I'm politically drawn
Yeah.
to that as an experience. I haven't embarked on this career just to make money
Just to make
as
money.
a
Yeah. There's,
doctor,
yeah.
and I get that there are other people who are deeply satisfied by doing, plastic surgery for, on people
Mm,
who don't fucking need it, but whatever, right?
yeah.
And that's how they make their money. And presumably they feel something inside that makes them really satisfied with the career path that they've chosen. But, that's all I mean is that I think that the goal, that idea of being young and going, well, this is where I should be, and I need to, unerringly stick to this path, and every step of the way that doesn't go my way is a failure. It's like, no, because that goal is not the thing you think it is. And
Yeah.
therefore, when you go out in the world, you may realize that suddenly you don't really want that thing anymore, right? You
Yeah.
want something that's a little bit different.
I mean, have you found that in terms of um sticking with principles and values and compromises over the years?
I mean, I think values are difficult. I think we all do have, I mean, there are sort of human values that everyone can kind of agree on,
Mm,
but I think the nuances are that we all approach them differently. And
yeah.
I think that there are things I've done that other people would find utterly appalling,
Mm,
frankly. Um, and I don't know, everyone has their boundary of what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do. But
yeah.
I think that certain values have shifted. I
Mm,
think I just don't think of anything as being that static. I
yeah.
think I think the minute you put a red line down and go, well, that is definitely a line I'm not willing to cross, you will be put in a position where suddenly you have to consider whether you're
Yeah,
going to
you'll have
cross
to
that
think
line.
about it.
And it will feel different because now you're actually in that situation, and the
Yeah.
decision isn't as easy as you thought it would be, right?
Mm, mm,
And I just think it's that resilience and that adaptability. And it is hard because at the same time, you don't want to just adapt to things and lose all your principles and go, well, now it suits me to actually fuck that person over or do
yeah.
something that 5 years ago I would have thought was an appalling lack of moral
Yeah.
judgment. So
Mm,
yes, we all have these lines, but they're kind of different for everyone. And
yeah, it's
people
true.
people justify things to themselves, and it's
Yes.
about knowing yourself. I mean, it's very malleable. If it wasn't, I mean, I actually think that things like, I know people who are like, oh, I don't read fiction because it's all
Mm,
made up. And I've always argued that no, fiction is more real, right? Because it's more human. And
yeah.
reading, it's such a shame that it's waning. People just don't have the patience to read,
Patience with
because that
reading, yeah.
idea of immersing yourself in a world and seeing how people react, that is from 200 years ago, or something
Yeah.
that's set, whenever it was written, there are universal things you can read. I mean, Wuthering Heights is the big film at the moment. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
But I've not seen the film. But if you read the book, Moose was saying, like, to be honest, I read that book and it didn't really do it for me. And I said, yeah, I know, because you're not a 15-year-old girl, right?
Mm, yeah.
That is the point when that book fucking is seismic, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the fact that that was written hundreds of years ago, when, and don't get me wrong, I love Dickens, but most male writers are writing about, women with winglets who are like fucking perfect. And do you know what I mean? Like, are so sweet and sugary. And you've got this book that exists about this fucking wild girl who doesn't fit in
Yeah.
anywhere, who is fucking drawn to this appalling, quite dark and abusive man.
Mm,
Right, isn't it amazing that
there
someone
it is.
wrote that in fucking
Yeah.
Yorkshire,
Yes.
hundreds of years
Hundreds of
ago?
years ago. Yeah.
Because people actually don't change, because that feeling of that,
Yeah.
that is universal, and you won't understand that unless you read those books.
Yeah. You're right. It is a shame about about kind of writing. Although I did read that uh like poetry books. amongst the kind of like 18 to 35s. This was maybe going back like a couple of years ago, but kind of sales of those books had kind of like gone through the roof. I was like, wow, I would never have thought that.
It's funny, isn't it, how it wraps around, because maybe it's the idea that it's short form. People
Yes,
have
yes, true.
short
Yeah,
attention spans, so suddenly that's where they can get a kind of depth and resonance.
yeah,
Is
yeah.
is they don't want to fucking plow through 300 pages of Middlemarch, so just give me the short version.
Just give me the short version. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I sometimes think, like myself, I've struggled with some books. Yours, I didn't do. I read Richard Jobson's about his time in Kreuzberg, which was great. I mean, it's fiction, but it's not fiction. He changed his own name, and then the rest of it is like his story of being there, and it's great. It's very as with yours as well. It's like very visual, like visually kind of strong. Like you can see in your mind the situations and the the places, the rooms, things like that. That's what kind of like inspires me with books. And I struggle with audiobooks, I must admit. I do struggle with audiobooks. I can't concentrate on
I
them. My mind just goes.
Funny enough, non-fiction I can deal with
Mm,
audiobooks. With fiction I do struggle.
yeah,
I don't mind kind of autobiography,
yeah,
that, particularly when it's in the voice of the person, I kind of
yeah, yeah,
quite that's
yeah.
quite adds another dimension. But yeah, factual books I can do, maybe because I'm used to sort of hearing like radio broadcasts that are quite newsy or something. But I
Could be,
think with
yeah,
with fiction, I think I need to see it on the page.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
I
I'm the
need the
same.
space to think, actually,
Yes, yeah,
um,
totally.
and take it at my own pace as well, and then go back and reread and flick back to, hang on, who was that again? What happened to them? And I can go back and go, oh yeah, 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 yeah. That's that character.
I think
And
I think there's sometimes the voice as well. It has to be. It's even more got
also,
to be even more
also, there's
engaging, doesn't
some
it?
really fucking hammy readings of books.
Terrible.
Sometimes
Yeah,
like when actors do fiction, and it's like, oh fuck off. This is,
yeah.
or they
Can we
put
just
on a
have the author
voice.
reading it? Come on, just do
Yeah,
it
I
normally.
don't need someone doing the fucking Yorkshire accent in a book. I just want to fucking imagine it myself. Like, yeah.
So when you got back to playing music and like songwriting, how did you? 'Cause the reason how did you find it? Because the reason I'm asking is like so when I was a kid, I played the cello and I did all my exams, got through kind of grade 8, passed my grade 8. Hated
Wow,
theory,
well done.
hated the music theory. I gave it up when I was about 17 because it what we were talking about earlier about being the only child, right? So this was the kind of thing that my dad wanted me to do this, so the whole way through it kind of felt a chore. Like, he made me practice and he needed to make me practice, but I hated it. I found every reason not to do it. So, but I kind of went through it because I never felt strong enough to say no to him, and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, but so the first opportunity, I kind of gave it up. And then, like 30, in fact, it was just before COVID, it was over 30 years later. I'd never touched the instrument, not even thought about it. And I went into the Yamaha shop in Soho and just asked the guy, I said, I haven't touched one. Can I just go and play one? And he said, unfortunately, there was like a closed room. So he said, just go in there. Got hold of the neck off the wall of the instrument, and like all this shit sort of came flooding back. I was like, fuck, I didn't expect that. And I started playing it. But anyway, I bought myself a new instrument and I'm relearning it again. But I have to change the way I'm thinking, right? From doing this very classical fixed framework where there's a right and a wrong. And of course, you haven't had that with Lush, but I just wonder how you found it, getting back into kind of songwriting and playing after that sort of time away.
I mean, I think that, it's interesting because when me and Emma were writing songs together, well, we didn't really write together. We wrote separately, but we were
Mm,
kind of, concurrently,
yeah.
and both learning the guitar at a similar time and kind of
Mm,
fed off each other a bit. And I think that Emma was actually kind of actually more instinctive. I'm a bit more rule bound. So I was like, oh, what's that chord? What's this chord? But Emma
mm,
would just come in with like, oh, I'm just leaving certain fingers off. Like I don't know what that chord's called, but that's what it is, right?
right,
And there
right.
was a real
Yeah.
playfulness to the way that she
Mm,
would do it. And I remember I was going out with this guy, Johnny, at the time, and he was a really good guitarist. And Emma would go like, ask him what this chord is. And it would literally be like one finger on a fret.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he'd go,
Yeah.
well, it depends. It depends. It's context. It depends what's before it and what's after it. It's not a chord. Right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But, when by the time we got to like recording songs, I remember Terry Edwards, actually, the
Mm,
brass player,
yeah.
like coming in and doing some brass on a track and him going, well, oh, that's interesting. You've got an E and then an E minor. And he's like, well, I'm classically trained. And I would be
Mm.
like, well, you can't do that. And I'm like, well, I can because I just have, right? And he's like, I know, but it's wrong, but I know what you mean. It works. And I
Mm.
remember thinking, well, that's quite liberating that you don't have those kind of rules.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
are
yeah,
just tinkering. Now, the flip side of that is that everything takes so much longer, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
you are playing something and you're thinking, I want it to go here, but where's that? And I'm going,
yeah,
is it a C? No, it's not a C. Is it a D? Is it an E? Is it an F? Is it a minor? Is it a this? And it's real trial and error. And
yeah,
sometimes, I'm envious of, the classically trained person who goes, well, these are the chords you can
yeah,
go. This is where it would naturally go,
yeah,
and there is a skill and a knowledge base that I don't have,
yeah,
right? So it's six of one, half a dozen of another, isn't it?
yeah. It's
It's
frustrating that.
it's just
Yeah.
different ways of doing things.
It's funny because like yeah, I hear that. And I have a like another perspective, and I needed the that framework, and that kind of, I guess, ability to read music and kind of technical stuff. But what I lacked was the ability to kind of improvise and to not know what the fuck I was doing and just almost go from instinct and try and that trial and error that we were talking about, of like, okay, that doesn't work, but this one does. I don't know what it is, but it just kind of works. And that is now what I'm trying to kind of coach myself in a way that's a little bit more kind of less rigid, because what my brain remembers is from 30 years ago.
For sure, but isn't that how in like, when people sort of, I don't know, someone makes some, world music record because they were
Yeah,
inspired by a visit to wherever the fuck they went, right?
yeah, yeah.
And I kind of get it that, I mean, in a way, you're probably in the best position of all because you've got that training, you've got that skill,
Mm,
you've got that memory of that ability. And now you're in a position where you can open your mind to maybe listening to different kinds of music and see how that adapts to
mm,
the instrument that you're
yeah,
doing.
yeah.
I always found it fascinating that learning even that in Japan, there's even a different scale, right? So
Mm,
they have that funny instrument. I can't remember. It's got three strings on it and no frets, but they
yeah.
actually have like tone, quarter tone, semitone, quarter
Right,
tone,
yeah.
right? So they sound flat or sharp to our
Yeah,
ears,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? But they actually exist. Like there's a wider, a more
Mm,
kind of, condensed, or there's more elements to their spectrum of what they're hearing.
yeah,
And it's the same with language, you know what I mean? There are sounds we
yeah.
can't make um, because we have an accent if we try and speak another language because the nuances just aren't there in our programming. But if you'd have
Yeah.
been born in that place, you would have had that. And I think with music, it's the same thing. You suddenly hear something and you think, God, that's a weird way to go from that
Mm,
chord. That goes somewhere really strange. And then you can analyze it and think, what a
mm,
weird place to go to from those two chords to go to there, you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
And but you kind of already need some of the skills to know what that, how to express that and how to
Well,
physically play it.
I'm kind of interested, like with the what I mean, it's probably you probably heard this lots before, but the one thing that sort of strikes me about your songwriting in particular is it's just those like real kind of like striking, very striking kind of minor, major chord changes that you have. That that's what I was talking about in the intro. That's the for me that's the sort of stuff that really kind of grabs me, with your songs. I'm not going to say you do it in every song, but there's a lot of that, and it's just so powerful, I find.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that just
suppose.
like kind of instinctive?
I think it is quite instinctive, but then I think, we're all kind of a mess of whatever influences we have. I mean,
Yeah,
I remember there's a song Ocean that was on Spooky, and I remember I was fucking around with it for ages, like doing it 3, 4 time. It was
yeah,
fast and it was slow, it was this, it was that. And I remember actually Emma going, "Oh, it sort of sounds kind of weirdly East European." And
mm,
I remember thinking, oh, okay. So maybe that is just something that, I don't know, listening to, gypsy music in Hungary through some crackling radio, like somehow that's kind of left an impression on me, you know what I mean?
yeah,
And where you choose to go to, because I do think with a song, I mean, I think, funny enough, I think Emma was more like she had a completeness to it,
mm,
So I really envied, she could feel the complete thing. To me, it was always a bit of a meandering journey, like, where do I go next? Where's this song going? And it's like one step
mm,
after another.
yeah,
But I do think that, a lot of it is guesswork.
mm,
It's more knowing what's wrong. Oh no, that wrong. No, that harmony. No, that just sounds a bit boring. There's got to be another one that will work. And then you kind of sit there and experiment. Oh, that's the one, that's the one. And then even the idea of, I think a lot of what Lush did was also, bass lines that have their own melody. So even if
yes,
that
yeah,
particular bass
true,
note doesn't really work with that chord, it works because the bass line is moving along a path and
yeah, yeah.
they jar slightly in that one note, but then they resolve.
I get you. Yeah, that's it. That's interesting. What do you think? What do you think well, too big a question this, but like kind of like the role of music is today?
The role
What
of music.
yeah, because I often think back to music has a long time been about protest, rebellious, kind of gives some people to things to hang on to. I don't know. I just wonder if it's changed. If
No, I
if
don't
it's
think it's
meaning.
changed. I think that, so my take is that when you have small children, there are some very, it's quite interesting to see children because they love colour, they
Mm,
love effectively art, right?
yeah,
There is um yeah, it's quite a weird thing when you have a child and you're looking at children's books. I remember looking at them and there's like, I don't know, Spot the dog or whatever. And they're actually, and you're going, dog, dog. And you think, actually, and they're looking at it clueless. I mean, I'm talking about babies, right?
yeah,
And you realize that actually this looks nothing like a real dog.
mm,
This is a representation. There's a mental leap that has to be made. So real baby books just have photographs of things.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then there's the developmental stage where you can have kind of cartoony images of things.
Mm,
And
okay.
then they understand that leap. But the colour, the big blocks of colour, and that is really appealing to children.
Mm,
So children love art, music, nursery rhymes, little songs, just the sound of things fascinates
yeah,
them, right? And I think stories, the spoken word, a narrative, little children love, the kind of surprise of it. They love the
yes,
repetition of it,
yeah,
you know. And so I think all of those things are very visceral and human, right? And
yeah,
music
yeah.
being one of them, I think hey, there are people who grew up with their mums turning on like Radio 1 in the morning and dancing around the kitchen while they were making breakfast. And, they've just got that memory of it. It was like a joyful thing or funny, or, I guess, I don't know, hearing music in films. I used to
Mm,
love like the music in Disney films, you know what I
yeah,
mean? I mean, it
yeah,
almost made me like cry,
yeah,
just hearing like, the bare necessities. I just used to think
yes.
it was like just this wonderful moment in, you know what I mean? And the marriage of like animation with music. So blah, blah, blah. All I'm
Mm,
saying is that I think of these things as incredibly human, which then
mm,
takes me to the world of AI, right? And
mm,
this
mm.
idea that we are I mean, I don't know what the fuck these people are doing. I get the applications of AI, and there's all sorts of ways that it will be a tool. I think starting at the point of AI replacing writing, music, art is the weirdest place to begin. And I
Mm.
completely object to it, because the whole point of all of those mediums to me is that they're human, right?
Yeah, I
And
agree.
actually, I get it that someone could say, oh, you won't be able to tell the difference soon, right? But the thing is even if I can't tell the difference, I will actually go, in that case, I'm not going to do any of it. I'm actually going to seek out things that I absolutely know for certain were created by a human being, because that's
Yeah,
not what I
yeah,
want from art
absolutely.
or
Yeah.
music or any of those things. I want that human connection. I do not want to be um, sold something that ticks all my boxes. That's not what I'm after,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
So I think with the idea of music meaning protest or joy or dance or rebellion, I think it has always been all of those things. You
Yeah.
know, I know people who, my dad's generation in Hungary, who were there in 1956 and, escaped, most of them. And this one guy, Peter Pollard in particular, talked about his never-ending love of jazz, because he said in the 50s, when the communists had like kind of outlawed jazz
Mm,
effectively,
mm,
right, you would go to these underground clubs and we would lose our shit. We would
yeah.
drink, we would dance, we would go fucking crazy to this
Yeah.
American jazz music.
Mm,
And it meant everything. It was joy, it was liberation, it was rebellion, it was all of those things. And it was
yeah.
human. And it
Mm,
was also escape. And I think the idea of AI coming up with, hey, yeah, a tune that's nice, or even a soundtrack that you go, yeah, it's kind of, it fits the film, it's doing something.
yeah.
I'm not interested. I'm
Yeah.
literally
Yeah.
not interested.
Yeah.
You know?
100%. 100%.
So I don't know what the role is. I would
Yeah.
argue, I think commercially, or in terms of earning a living, it will probably take away everybody's living. I don't think it will stop people. Van
For making
Gogh's
it. Yeah.
paintings sell for absolute billions. They are the world's most expensive paintings. The guy
Mm,
died in poverty, right, and
yeah.
lived in
Yeah.
poverty. And so I have a huge amount of faith in the resonance of people continuing to create things absolutely with their fucking hands and their
Yeah.
brains. And I personally think it will live on, right? Whether the masses want to suck up some AI created bullshit, I suspect that they will tire of it. I suspect
Mm,
that the wealthy will still continue to buy things that are human made, and
yeah.
will have their own private music, like kings would have like Mozart being their court musician,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They will still keep the uniqueness of that human stuff. It's the rest of us that are going to be denied it. So I would suggest that, you turn your back on the AI produced things, because the rich are going to keep the real stuff to themselves. I promise you.
Mickey, I think that is a really good place to stop.
Thank you.
We could go on. Honestly, I could go on all day, but
No, it's
it,
been fascinating. Thank
it's
you.
been fascinating. Thanks so much. It's been really, really good to chat. Really good.
Good. Well, thanks for the topic chat. Yeah, that's quite a philosophical start to my Monday. Right.